There was nothing unusual about the small property on Miller Road. A weathered farmhouse sat behind a crooked fence. Chickens roamed a bare yard. The land looked tired, the kind of place you'd drive past without thinking twice. But every night at dusk, something changed. A woman named Maria would step outside with a shovel. She wore the same blue work jacket, no matter the season. She'd dig deep into the hard earth of her backyard. Hour after hour. Night after night. 4 months. No one knew why. Her neighbors watched. Her family asked. Maria never explained. She simply kept digging. 3 years later, when the worst drought in 30 years hit the county, her backyard was the only piece of land that didn't fail. It was green. It was alive. It was impossible. This is how she did it. Maria Hernandez was 42 years old when everything changed. She lived on 6 acres outside a small town called Riverside, in northern Missouri. The land had been in her family for 63 years, since her grandfather bought it in 1960. But by 2021, it was failing. The soil was hard as concrete. Nothing grew easily. The few crops her late husband had tried to plant 5 years earlier had withered. The pasture was mostly weeds. Maria had 2 adult children living in the city and a part-time job at a local hardware store that barely covered property taxes. She was not a farmer. She had never wanted to be one. Her brother, David, lived 20 miles away on his own property. He ran a conventional operation, row crops, heavy equipment, chemical inputs. He made decent money. Everyone in the family assumed he had made the right choice. Maria had a degree in marketing from a community college. She'd worked in retail most of her life. When her husband died suddenly of a heart attack at 51, she was left with the house, the land, and the crushing weight of deciding what to do with it. Selling was the obvious choice. A developer from Kansas City had approached her 3 times. He offered $850,000 for the land. At the time, that would have paid off debts and bought her a small house in town. She said no each time. She couldn't explain why. There was no logic to it. But the land felt like part of her in a way she didn't have words for. By early 2022, the land was becoming a liability. The property taxes were $4,200 a year. Repairs to the farmhouse cost money. The heating system was failing. She had $12,000 in savings. At that rate, she had less than 3 years before she'd have no choice but to sell. The developer had stopped calling. The market had shifted. One afternoon in March, Maria was at the hardware store when her manager, Dale, pulled her aside. "Maria, we're cutting your hours. Down to 20 a week. Starting next month." Maria felt something collapse inside her. She'd been at 35 hours. That night, she sat on her back porch and looked at the field behind the house. It stretched to the property line, 5 acres of hardpan clay and scrub grass. In the failing light, it looked like nothing. She had a choice to make. She could take the money. She could leave. Or she could try to fix something. The digging started 3 days later. Maria drove to the county extension office on a Tuesday morning. She'd never been there before. The building was small, attached to the agricultural supply warehouse. A woman named Henry Chen worked there. She was 64 and had been with the extension office for 37 years. She knew soil. She knew what worked and what didn't work in that county. Maria sat across from her desk and said, "I want to make my land productive. But I don't have much money." Henry looked at Maria for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather bought that land in 1960? "Yes." "How did you?" "I remember when he bought it. The soil was good then. Black soil. Rich." "What happened?" Maria shrugged. "We stopped farming it. It got hard." Henry pulled up a chair and sat down beside Maria instead of staying behind the desk. "Let me show you something," Henry said. She pulled out a thick folder filled with papers, photographs, and handwritten notes. They were all from her own research project going back 20 years. Most conventional farming depletes soil. We till it. We use chemicals. We expose it to sun and wind. Gradually, it dies. It gets hard. It loses its structure. Nothing wants to grow in dead soil. Henry pointed to photographs taken over several years. In the first image, a field was bare and cracked. In the last image, taken 6 years later, the same field was dark brown and held moisture. Plants grew thick. How long did that take? Maria asked. 4 years before we saw real change. 6 years to get it really healthy. Maria's heart sank. 6 years. She didn't have 6 years. But Henry wasn't finished. She opened a notebook with handwriting covering 20 pages, front and back. This is how my grandfather did it. He came from Taiwan in 1955. His family had farmed for 600 years. They knew something we forgot, how to rebuild soil without waiting a lifetime. Henry pulled out a single sheet and photocopied it for Maria. Start with this, Henry said. Deep digging. Aerating. Adding organic matter. It's not magic. It's just remembering that soil is alive. Over the next 2 weeks, Maria met with Henry 3 more times. Henry explained the science clearly, without condescension. Soil is a living ecosystem, Henry said during their 3rd meeting. It contains bacteria, fungi, earthworms, insects. They create air pockets. They break down organic matter. They help plants get nutrients. Most importantly, they hold water. Dead soil sheds water like concrete. Living soil holds water like a sponge. When you aerate soil deeply and add organic matter, you're bringing that ecosystem back. Henry's method was specific. First, dig down 3 feet in patches. Break up the subsoil layer where nothing grows. As you dig, add layers, compost, aged manure, cardboard for weed suppression. Return the topsoil on top. Second, leave the patches alone for months. Let nature work. Third, repeat. Slowly, patch by patch. You dig in the evening when it's cooler, Henry said. You add material. You let it rest. Then you move to the next section. 1 section at a time. 12 patches, 1 year. How much organic material do I need? Maria asked. At least 40 cubic yards for 5 acres if you're doing it right. Mixed in well. 40 cubic yards. That would cost money. But then Henry said, where does organic waste go in this town? Maria started in April of 2022. She contacted the town's waste management facility. They were happy to let her have free compost, the kind made from landscaping debris and untreated wood chips. They had piles of it backed up and no place to put it. She arranged for the first delivery on a Saturday, 10 cubic yards. It arrived in a dump truck and was unloaded in a heap at the edge of the property. Maria rented a small tractor and trailer. She'd never operated heavy equipment before. The rental guy, Sam, showed her the basics in 20 minutes. She learned how to engage the loader bucket and drive. For 3 weeks, she worked every evening after her hardware store shifts. She'd dig a 4 by 8 foot section, about 3 feet deep. She'd break up the hard subsoil with a mattock and shovel. She'd load compost into the bucket. She'd mix it in. By late May, she'd completed 6 sections. She was exhausted. Then heavy rain came. It rained for 4 days straight. Over 6 inches fell. Maria went out after the second day and saw the problem immediately. Water was pooling in 2 of her sections. Not draining. She dug into clay. Pure clay. It held water like a bathtub. One of her neighbor's fields flooded. The water ran downhill and pooled where Maria had dug. By the time the rain stopped, the water was 6 inches deep in some of her fresh sections. The organic matter she'd worked so hard to add was just floating there. She'd made it worse. Maria sat on her back porch that evening and cried. Not because she was sad, but because she was so tired. Tired and stuck. She called Henry the next morning. The clay is holding water, Maria said. I made a swamp. You're right, Henry said. That's a real problem. Your grandfather's land has a drainage layer issue. We need to fix that first. Henry came out to the property on a Saturday morning. She walked Maria to each of the 6 sections. You're digging on a slope, Henry pointed out. The water wants to run down. It's hitting this dense layer about 18 inches down. That's hardpan clay. Nothing drains through it. She pointed to the field above Maria's property. The water runs downhill through your brother's land. He has some drainage. That's why his property works better. So what do I do? Maria asked. You need to create a French drain. A simple one. A line of stones and perforated pipe in a ditch. It'll channel water to that ravine at the property edge. Let me draw it for you. Henry sketched in the dirt with a stick. She showed Maria a line running from the upper part of the property downward, ending at the ravine. That'll cost some money, Henry said. French drain materials. Labor maybe. But without it, you're fighting gravity. Maria's savings were getting tighter. She had $8,000 left. But David, her brother, helped her this time. He came over with his tractor and dug the drain line for free. It took him 4 hours. Maria bought the materials, plastic pipe and crushed stone, for $600. They completed the drain in one afternoon in early June. Maria began again in mid-June. This time, she dug in a pattern that followed Henry's design. She started on the high side of the property and worked downward in sections. The French drain now intercepted water before it could pool. The work was harder the second time. She knew what it felt like. She knew she'd already failed once. But she also knew more. She requested another delivery of compost. Another 10 cubic yards arrived. She mixed it in carefully, 3 feet down, 3 sections at a time. By August, she'd completed 10 patches. She planted nothing yet. Henry had been clear. First year is about building. Second year you test. Third year you really farm. Maria worked through the fall and into November. She was covered in clay, constantly. Her hands were cracked. The hardware store had cut her hours again. She was down to 15 a week, paid by the day they needed her. But the patches she'd finished first, back in June, were changing. The soil in those areas was darker. Earthworms were visible when she dug. Weeds seemed smaller, easier to pull out. In late November, she planted a cover crop, winter rye and clover, on the completed sections. It would protect the soil and add more organic matter when tilled in the spring. By December, grass was growing on those patches. Real grass, not the sparse weeds that had existed before. Winter was hard. Maria had almost no income. The hardware store closed her shifts to just Thursdays and Fridays. She and her brother agreed she'd do odd jobs for him, maintenance work, repairs, for cash. That brought in maybe $400 a month. She cut back on everything. She stopped the heating oil service and used a wood stove. She grew a garden in the house using grow lights. She ate a lot of beans and rice. In February of 2023, one of her sections actually produced. She planted cool-season greens, lettuce, spinach, kale, in the beds she'd improved. They grew. Not abundantly, but real food from real growth. She harvested 30 pounds of greens over 6 weeks. It was maybe $200 worth of produce if she'd bought it in a store. But it wasn't about the money. It was the proof. The soil was working. She brought some of it to Henry at the extension office. Henry looked at the greens and smiled. The color is good, Henry said. Leaves are normal thickness. You're getting there. How much longer? 2 years. Maybe 18 months if you push. You want quality soil, not just soil that's not dead. Real quality takes time. Spring of 2023 was dry. Normal rainfall from March through May in that county was 8 inches. That year, they got 1 inch. David's fields turned brown in May. Everyone's fields turned brown. The county issued a drought advisory by June. The agricultural supply store started rationing seed orders. There were talks about this being the worst drought in over 30 years. Maria's completed sections stayed green. She'd improved 15 sections by then. The rest of the land was still hard clay. But the 15 patches, which covered about 1.5 acres, held moisture. Henry came by in mid-June. She walked the property, looking at the green patches in contrast to the brown sections around them. You're seeing the difference, Henry said. That's the water-holding capacity. Living soil holds moisture for 30 to 40 days. Dead soil, maybe 5. That's why you're green and everyone else is brown. Maria had started selling some produce to a farmer's market in the next town over. Nothing major. Just greens, some early tomatoes in containers. She was making $50 to $100 a week during growing season. In July, at the farmer's market, a woman named Susan approached her. Susan owned a restaurant 30 miles away. She was looking for local produce suppliers. "I like your greens," Susan said. "They're clean. Good flavor. What's your operation?" Maria told her the truth. "I have 1.5 acres right now. It's just me. I'm learning." Susan gave her a card. "Get it to 3 acres. 2 tons a month in season. Then call me. We can talk." That contract promise, if it happened, could mean $3,000 a month for 4 months. $12,000 a year. It could change everything. But she had to grow. She had to finish the remaining sections. In August of 2023, her neighbor, Tom, stopped by. Tom lived in the next house over, about 200 yards away. He farmed conventionally on 30 acres. He'd known Maria's husband years ago. "Maria, what exactly are you doing out here?" he asked. She was in her 16-hour section, digging and mixing compost on a hot afternoon. Maria showed him the work, the dug sections, the compost, the earlier sections growing green. Tom shook his head slowly. "That's a lot of work," he said. "And a lot of compost. For what?" "A few vegetables." "Eventually more than that," Maria said. "You know, that developer would still probably buy," Tom said. He wasn't being unkind. He was just being practical. "You could sell now. Be done with this." "I'm not done yet," Maria said. Tom left shaking his head. "Suit yourself. Just seems like a lot of work for something you're learning as you go." It bothered Maria. Not because Tom was wrong to doubt, but because his doubt found the doubt inside herself. She was learning as she went. She was a hardware store clerk, not a farmer. The land was hardpan clay, not black soil. The drought was real. And even if this worked, it was slow. She called Henry that night. "Tom says this is crazy," Maria said. Henry laughed. "Of course it's crazy. Every person who's ever done something different was crazy. Tom is comfortable with his way. You're doing something different. Difference is always crazy until it works." Summer of 2024 brought the real heat. By July, temperatures were reaching 103 degrees. The drought continued for a second year. It was worse than the first year, the one everyone said was the worst in 30 years. But worse because now 2 years of hardpan land with no water meant vegetation was dying. Trees started showing stress. The grass was completely gone from unimproved sections. On Maria's improved sections, she had green growing. Not lush, but definitely growing. By this time, she'd completed 22 sections. That was about 2 acres done, with 7 sections yet to improve. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, and squash grew in the heat. Greens wilted in the afternoon heat, but recovered overnight when she drip irrigated at the cooler evening hours. In mid-July, a reporter from the County Agricultural Extension newsletter came by. He wrote a small piece, "Local Woman Experiments with Soil Regeneration, Early Results Promising." The article ran in the Extension newsletter that went to 300 farming families in the county. Tom read it. He came by again. "That was you," he said. "Yes," Maria said. He stood in silence for a long moment, looking at the green sections growing in the middle of brown land. "Well," he said finally, "that's something." It was maybe the smallest compliment in the world. But Maria felt like it meant something had shifted. By August of 2024, something started attacking the tomatoes. Hornworms. They appeared almost overnight and devastated the crop. In 3 days, they'd eaten 50% of the developing fruit. Maria found them at night using a flashlight, fat green worms, as long as her thumb, eating her future harvest. She'd planned on 2 tons of tomatoes. Now she'd be lucky to get 1 ton. She didn't have chemical pesticides. Henry had been clear from the start, "You're rebuilding soil life. Don't poison what you're rebuilding." So Maria did it the old way. Every evening at dusk, she picked hornworms by hand. She walked every tomato plant and pulled the worms off. She crushed them or put them in a bucket of soapy water. It took 45 minutes every night for 2 weeks. She caught 127 worms total. By late August, the pest pressure dropped. The damage was done, but it stopped getting worse. She brought the salvageable tomatoes to Susan, the restaurant owner, who'd stayed interested. "I had hornworms," Maria said. "The yield is lower this year." Susan looked at the tomatoes. They were small because Maria had thinned them to direct all energy to the remaining fruit. But the flavor was intense. "These are better than last year," Susan said. "They taste like tomatoes used to taste. Stronger. I can use these. What are you looking at for August next year?" "If I finish all the sections, maybe half a ton a week." Susan nodded. "I'll take all of that you can give me. For $1.50 a pound." Half a ton a week was 1,000 pounds. At $1.50 a pound, that was $1,500 a week for 4 months. $6,000. It wasn't enough to replace a full-time job. But it was real. By late fall of 2024, Maria had completed 26 sections. She was on the last section. The whole 5 acres, minus the paths between sections, was technically improved. But improved didn't mean perfect. Some sections were only in their second year of regeneration. The last section was brand new. They all needed time. She'd spent $8,200 total on materials: the French drain, compost that wasn't free, seeds, tools, irrigation supplies. She'd earned back about $3,600 from the farmer's market and $2,000 from Susan's deposit on next season's produce. Her brother had given her $4,000 as a loan, no interest, no timeline for repayment. She owed $1,200 in property taxes that January. The heating system in the house still needed work. But she was still there. Winter of 2024 was unusual. Storms moved through the region with unusual intensity. In January, unusual warm rains fell. In February, the aquifer levels were noted as unusually high in the county extension report Henry showed her. "I've never seen this pattern," Henry said. "Unusually wet fall, warm rains, then normal snow. And the aquifer is saturated. When it gets hot again." She didn't finish the sentence. In late February, Maria noticed something unusual. The creek that ran through the ravine at the edge of her property was higher than usual. Normally in winter it was a trickle. Now it was moving fast and was 6 feet wide at its normal banks. Tom mentioned it when he stopped by. "That creek's higher than I've ever seen it," Tom said. "Hasn't gone down all winter. The soil's just holding water. Everything is saturated." Henry sent an email to the extension list. March weather forecast showing possibility of heavy rainfall and potential flooding risk in western areas of county. Review drainage preparations. March 2025 started with rain. It came on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, 3 inches had fallen. By Thursday morning, another 4 inches. The Weather Service issued a flood warning. By Friday morning, the National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch for the region. Maria's Creek had overflowed its banks by Thursday evening. Water was spreading across the adjacent land, Tom's land. The water was flowing rapidly downhill, picking up force and debris as it came. By Friday morning, Tom's lower field was under 1 to 2 feet of water. His equipment shed, built on a low point for convenience, had water running through it. His tractor was sitting in floodwater. His corn storage shed, which held last year's harvest, was inundated. Maria's property sat on higher ground. The water ran down through her property in streams that had built natural channels over the winter runoff. The French drain Henry had designed caught water before it could pool. The improved soil, with its sponge-like structure, absorbed moisture rather than shedding it. Where the water did flow across her property, it drained quickly downhill and away, doing no damage. By Saturday morning, the rain had stopped. The water was receding. Tom stood at his field's edge, looking at the damage. Equipment covered in mud. The corn storage shed had 16 inches of water in it, destroying the grain. His estimate of loss was $35,000. Maria's property was wet but intact. Tom walked over to Maria's place that afternoon. He stood at the edge of her improved sections. The water had moved through but done no damage. The soil, broken and aerated, had absorbed the intense water. The plants were still standing. He looked at Maria for a long time. "You knew," he said. "No," Maria said quietly. Henry knew. The soil is alive. It absorbs instead of shedding. That's just what a live soil does. Tom nodded slowly and walked back home. By summer of 2025, word had spread. 6 neighbors approached Maria asking about soil regeneration. She worked with Henry to start a workshop series on her property. They did 4 Saturday morning sessions. 42 people showed up across the sessions. Tom was at the first one. By October 2025, 3 neighbors had started their own regeneration projects. The farmers market manager asked if Maria could supply other farmers. She connected 5 small growers in the region with the same method. Within a year, there was a loose network of regenerated soil producers selling together. Susan, the restaurant owner, opened a second location. She built it specifically to feature local regenerative produce. Maria hired her first employee in spring of 2026, a local college student studying agriculture who'd been inspired by the workshops. The land was no longer a liability. Maria had stopped worrying about money, at least about the basic kind. The property taxes were paid. The house was repaired. She'd repaid her brother's loan. The developer still contacted her occasionally. The most recent offer was $2.2 million. She declined. On a warm evening in late April of 2026, Maria was walking the property with Henry. They stopped at the first patch she'd ever dug, 4 years earlier. The soil was rich and dark. Earthworms were abundant. The structure was firm but crumbly. When Henry squeezed a handful, it held together but still drained water properly. "How long until it's perfect?" Maria asked. "It's perfect," Henry said. "It's alive." Maria stood at the edge of her property and looked across the land that had seemed worthless just 4 years before. The soil had transformed. The land had transformed. She had transformed. She thought of something Henry had said near the beginning: patience isn't about waiting. It's about understanding that real change happens in small increments, and those increments, compounded over time, become something nobody thought was possible. That was the truth Maria had learned. Not from books or farming experience. She'd learned it by digging. 1 section at a time. 1 night at a time. 1 season at a time. Until the impossible became ordinary.